Hey guys, welcome to another Workforce Wednesday. I've got Paul Jarvis with me, and we are going to be talking data and human capital and all sorts of good things. But first, this. I don't know that I've seen that intro before, Jada's running things behind the scene. But the one thing I do have to say about it is if you go back and look at it, there's a terrible typo in there. And Wednesday is misspelled. So we need to go get that fixed. Paul, I'm sorry, I'm doing a little business here live and on screen. And it's like, I just, I'm a terrible speller, but normally I have people who fix it. And so it's like,
I saw that too. And I was like, is he going to notice this or am I going to be the only one?
Yeah, no, it was just two letters were transposed. So we'll have to go back and get that fixed. Paul, welcome to Workforce Wednesday. Let's start by just having you talk a little bit about who you are, your passion in senior living, and then we'll dig in.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me, Steve. So I'm Paul Jarvis, new to ProCare, but I've been in the senior living industry for a little over 5 years. I had previously co-founded and was CEO of a company called Clarent, and we did business intelligence and data analytics for senior living owners and operators. So basically, we helped them pull data out of all the different systems they were using, join it up in one place, get a comprehensive picture of their business. And like I mentioned, joined ProCare recently because I was really excited about what we're doing when it comes to the human capital side of it. The business of senior living can't be divorced from the people. And I think ProCare has some really awesome solutions when it comes to the people side. On a personal note, because you kind of asked, like, how did I get into the industry? It was a little bit of good luck, and then it felt just right. So, growing up, I was really close to my grandparents. Used to spend every summer with my mom's parents, and the experience of helping them move out of the house where they were for 60 years into a skilled nursing facility was, it basically led me to making a bunch of changes, quitting the job I had at the time, kind of realigning my priorities around spending more time with family. And when I started Clarent, honestly, we were originally looking at like retailers and hotels and other types of companies, but our very first customer was an assisted living company up in the Pacific Northwest. And so once we started working with them, I realized, here is this industry, like this is the right place to be. These folks have a great mission. They're wonderful people. And there's a lot of opportunity on the technology side. So that was kind of how I got into the industry and have been here, as I said, for 5 years now.
So I love these stories. You're like the third person I've talked to this week. The other times I think have been offline, but off live stream where I've sort of asked people about their passion. And it seems like it almost always starts with a grandparent story. And so I always feel kind of bad, honestly, when I hear those stories because my real passion for senior living, and has been for the frontline workforce. I don't know that I can say this out loud, but I sort of jokingly say, I don't really care that much about the old people. And it's really hard to say that now because now I'm technically about as in the old people category myself. But I look at the frontline workers in our industry, and these are people who have who in many cases could receive public assistance and not have to work. And they've got this passion for caring for older people and doing this pretty thankless, hard job. And so I'm really, really committed to how you make those people's lives better. So that's my little aside story. So let's talk about, where do I start? So it seems sort of like ProCare merging with a data company sort of makes your head spin a little bit like that and go, what's the connection? Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, it started from a mutual customer. So I got a voicemail from Brett, the CEO of ProCare, which I still have on my phone, saying, hey, we worked with some similar people, heard good things about you guys. Can you call me back? So that was how we started here. But yeah, I'll give you kind of some good examples. Honestly, something Something we were very good at Clarent was putting data on a dashboard in front of people. Something that we struggled with a bit was helping our customers actually drive change on those numbers. And the reason for that was we were a technology company. We were a degree removed. We primarily worked with C-suite, VP, finance folks. So we were looking at numbers. Really, the people who drive the levers of the business are at the community level. And so there was always something missing in our ability to actually help our customers drive change. And the kind of buzzword that you hear all the time in this industry is actionable insights, or like actionable data. And the key piece of that is, right, it's action plus data. And the thing that ProCare had, which I thought was really interesting, was 70% of their team came from senior living, and they work very, very closely with their clients on really a day-to-day basis and at the community level, doing things like scheduling and hiring, onboarding new staff, like bread and butter human resources functions. So to me, it was this opportunity to say, okay, what were we really good at with Clarent? Like seeing the big picture of trends and data from different systems and cleaning it up and making it work for senior living. What were we not so great at? Helping busy people use that data to make incremental changes on a day-to-day basis that add up to a big result. And that seemed to be what ProCare was really good at, maybe not as good at the data side of things. So like on paper, maybe not that clear of why the marriage is there. But then when we spent some time together, it was like, okay, our skill sets are actually very complementary.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I feel like I should probably back up a little bit on, you and I, and we sort of know who and what ProCare is. And we've maybe gone into this without actually defining that. And so I'm going to use my definition because I think I like it better than as I've worked with them. And they're really an HR platform to help senior living operators, only senior living operators, really maximize their workforce so they can work effectively and at a lower cost. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So how do we use data? How do I use data I'm going to throw a whole bunch at you and you can pick how you want to do it. How do I use data to hire better, to manage better, maybe even to figure out when to terminate, and use data to control costs, maximize efficiency of my team?
Cool. Great question. The one little flavor on it I'm going to say is, how do you use data plus experts, right? It's not just the data, it's the data plus the people. So that's the one little twist I'll put on it.
Okay, good.
But let's take managing labor costs as a great example, and we'll start there. So intuitively, everybody knows that if you're looking at a schedule and you're looking ahead in the future and it has a bunch of people on PTO, you're probably going to have to fill those shifts with overtime or agency because your regular staff members are not going to be available. So you could look at the data and say, yep, like this is pretty clear. I can agree on that. The thing that's difficult to do is say, how do I move around all the different shifts and do it in a way that allows me to manage that labor cost in advance? So if I need to bring in more people or ask people to rebalance vacation or like whatever little incremental tinkering I need to do, how can I use the data I have today, plus knowledge of my people and what they want to do? Plus, it's just like a lot of time coordinating this kind of thing. You're talking to other people, you're making phone calls, you're sending emails, you're adjusting the schedule, you're doing multiple versions of it. But at the end of the day, we all have the same goal, which is I want to build a schedule that works for my residents based on their acuity and census. It works for my team members. These are the hours that they want to work. And it works for our financial constraints. And the way you do that is you pull in a bunch of payroll and time and attendance data, you pull in census data, you pull in your budgets, you look at it, you work with an expert to say, is this right? You tinker with it and you iterate on it. So that what I just described is a lot of different things that could be very overwhelming. Where I think
I'm exhausted already.
Yeah, where I think ProCare offers a good solution is they have this labor management product that comes with a really easy to use scheduling software. So like it was built by the guys who built the Uber scheduling software. So they're pretty good at building scheduling. Yep. And it also comes with a woman on the ProCare side, or comes with is the wrong term. You are supported and partnered with a woman on the ProCare side, Emily, who was a scheduler in the community. And so she does a lot of the work of looking at the data, building schedules, working with you weeks in advance so that when it gets to 3 weeks out and people are on PTO, your schedule is still in a good place. So that's that combination of it's a lot of data, and then it's having an expert look at it and give it the time and attention that gives you the right result.
Cool. I like that a lot. So what else, in terms of data, what are the new frontiers? Where do you think data goes? And I'm going to start by setting a little bit more of a stage. It seemed like for the last probably 3 or 4, maybe even 5 years, as I would go to senior living conferences, and I go to a lot of conferences, whenever there was a technology discussion, it was robots, 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 robots. A lot of buzz about robots, and a few people who are using robots, but it'd be hard to say that why we have probably we're still in an early adopter phase in the industry. And then something happened at the beginning of this year where nobody's talking about robots, and it's all data and AI. So where do we go with this data AI thing? My sense is that senior living is kind of behind the curve in terms of what can be done with data.
I think generally, I mean, there's steps along the way. So like the first step is, are you moving from pen and paper to living in a digital system? And I think that the industry has made a lot of progress on there, particularly at regional, national, kind of more sophisticated operators who have invested in that. Then you have kind of, can I hook my systems together? Can I see a holistic picture of my data? And then the last piece is, okay, what do I actually do with my data? And it's that last piece, the what do I do with my data, where AI has frankly lowered the bar for what you're able to do. So what I mean by that is previously you had to have some degree of technical competency. Someone needed to build you like a dashboard, or you needed to know how to use SQL to look at a database. Like you needed time and skills to really get the most out of your data. Now with tools like ChatGPT and things like that, you could throw a bunch of spreadsheets in there and say, hey, I have some questions, spit back answers. And they may not always be right, but you're getting a lot further, and you're just one person, right? You don't have a team of data analysts. You're not paying a ton of money to a vendor. Like, it is much more accessible for people to start to do these types of things by themselves. So that's one element. There's also a lot of work, not just like querying data, but generating data products and conclusions that you could use AI for. So whether it's presenting, I mean, a great example would be like looking at a bunch of data from an EHR and then summarizing an updated assessment and presenting it to a family. There's kind of 3 steps along the way. There's pulling data from a resident's EHR record. There's generate a suggested update to the assessment. And then there's turn that into a conversation with that person's family around why you may potentially need to charge more. And I think all of those things, AI is, again, very helpful at lowering the bar to do that type of analysis and making it faster, and then making it easier to have a follow-up from there by simplifying it, by putting it in human language. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done. And honestly, a lot of vendors are doing quite interesting stuff with AI across the board.
So do you see a day where we could take all this data stuff, dump it into some like big barrel, and then go to AI and just say, tell me what I need to know out of this, because I don't even know the right questions to ask, and actually get meaningful results?
Honestly, I'm a little bit of a skeptic in that regard. And like,
Okay.
I think you never want to take a person out of the loop, particularly when it comes to elder care and other critical elements. I'll give you kind of a funny example, Steve. So I have a friend of mine who is building an AI app for tarot card interpretations and dream interpretations.
Okay.
And like he's making money doing that. And the reason that is a great use case for AI is you can never be wrong. And it doesn't matter if you're wrong. Senior care, it matters if you're wrong, right?
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
you never want to move. I don't think anyone wants to move to a future where it's entirely machine driven without an expert human in the loop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was sharing with my team last week. I run a little men's Bible study group in midweek, and I was creating a flyer to hand out. And I sort of knew, but my creative juices weren't flowing. And so I dumped the data into my chat GPT and said, okay, create a flyer for me. And it kept, and I wanted graphics in it. and the graphics were just terrible. They had misspellings, and I gave it more instruction. And after the second time I gave it more instruction, it was still terrible. And I went back and looked, and I thought, man, did I misspell this or put the details? And all my stuff was right. And so you're absolutely right. You've got to have that human stuff. And finally, AI basically said, sorry, I can't do any better than that. And it was worse than the typo on our little video here today. So it was but it was a very funny experience. So I want to actually, I'm sort of thinking about operators who might be watching today live or the recording. I'm sitting in my community, maybe I'm single site, or I'm sitting in my organization, and I've got all these sort of just separate data sources. I've got an EHR, I've got a CRM, I've got some maybe something to help me with my life enrichment. I've got a call system that's dumping in. I've got maybe some pharmacy data coming in. I've maybe even got my web data. And so I've got all these different things that are plugged in. Maybe I've got some sensor data that I'm using. And I want to be able to use my data more effectively. Where do I start? I came to you, and I think that you're doing something wonderful, and I want to be able to be more effective with my data. Where do we start?
Sure. So, I'm a big fan of the 7 habits of highly successful people. And one of those is you begin with the end in mind. So that would be my first question is if you came to me and said, hey, Paul, I have a lot of data, help me. I would say, well, Steve, what do you want to do? Right? Are you interested in increasing employee retention? Do you want to raise your occupancy? Do you want to better manage your expenses? And really begin from that.
And I'd say yes to all of those.
Of course you would. You're a smart guy.
Yeah, that's right.
So the way you do it is you work backwards and you look at the equation and you think about, for the amount of work required, what is the most valuable thing I could do? And so with senior living, obviously, you're thinking about, just to kind of break out the business components, you're thinking about rentals, and let's take AL as an example, like you're thinking about rentals and care fees. And then on the expenses side, you're thinking about labor. And I'll talk about labor because I think that's kind of more of our wheelhouse. Like you're talking about being able to hire employees, retain them, train them, and properly apply their labor, essentially, like schedule them efficiently. And so you could break each of those out into kind of a product unto itself. So what we would do is just kind of peel the onion back and say, okay, we want to get better at workforce. Like we're going to start there. What is the challenge? Is it you've been unable to retain employees? And they're a mix of qualitative and quantitative. Like it's really easy to only look at a spreadsheet and lose the forest for the trees. So if you have a retention problem, it might be that you have an executive director who's a difficult manager and people don't want to work for that person. And that might not show up in a piece of data anywhere, but if you ask the last 5 people why they left your organization, they would all say the same thing. So it's gathering the right data, and then it's, again, peeling the onion back to say, what are the things we could do? And the thing I always encourage people to do is pick one thing at a time, make a hypothesis, and try to move change in there. So again, if you're focused on retention, I wouldn't try 10 different things all at once. You might try a new bonus program or a wage increase or some type of employee recognition program. But pick one thing, pick a couple KPIs that are easy to measure, because if it's too difficult, it'll fall apart. And then just track those things for 3 to 6 months and see if you make progress. And again, you basically just want to design an experiment where you say, I'm trying to change this number over here. I believe that these 2 or 3 things contribute to that. I'm going to try and isolate them as best as I can and try something. And I think that oftentimes people get stuck trying to build this magic thing and they're not able to make any progress versus picking smaller things and driving incremental change.
Yeah, I really like that. And you said the word that I just love, and that's try the experiments. I think that experiments are so valuable. So I'm just thinking, again, you're looking at human capital. If you've got you've got a higher turnover than you like, just being able to look at the data and say, are there commonalities in the people that are leaving? Is it, because the question is are we hiring wrong? Are we not treating them the way we need to treat them? Is it something that is out of their direct control as an executive director or a supervisor? So, maybe it's a particular department that becomes super valuable.
Exactly.
So, so do you have any, I was putting you on the spot here live, always dangerous to do, but any stories about how people have been able to use that? We talked a little bit about the staffing schedule and looking towards the holidays and impact of times. Anything else in terms of sort of managing or figuring out hiring or retention things that you can talk about?
Yeah. One thing I think, so we have this product that's talent acquisition. It's called ProCare Connect. Something I think they've done a really good job of is they automated the repetitive low value parts of it essentially. So part of that is you get a lot of applications. And we've learned that speed, basically it's similar to sales, like speed to lead is a really, really important metric. And replying to an applicant who may have applied to 10 different job positions, frankly, they might have generated their application with ChatGPT, like making it so the way the ProCare Connect model works is a machine screens their first application and then automatically sends them a survey to say, hey, can you fill out these questions? So you're adding computers in the right place to kind of screen out the low volume of applicants. And then you have a human to review it once they make it to the next stage, then pass it along to the hiring manager at the company to review. So I think it's a good example of combining technology to automate the boring stuff, which is reading through hundreds of resumes, and a person to do the right stuff, which is looking at the more qualified applicants and scheduling them for an interview as quickly as possible. And it's the marriage of those two things that gets applicants a good experience because they were replied to immediately, and gets the hiring company a good experience because they only get qualified applicants. So they don't have to deal with the top of funnel problem. So I think that's a good example, Steve, of the point I'm trying to make of like technology in the right place, people in the right place.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a little bit. I have talked to people who have been applying for job after job after job after job, and they get really, really frustrated where they're saying, my applications are going into the system. There's some algorithm, easy to blame the algorithm, that weeds me out, and I never even get a chance to show my stuff. How do we create that level of humanness inside a system like that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Again, I think things, honestly, stuff like career fairs is still like humans meeting humans. You'll never get away from that.
Yeah.
I'm going to kind of talk out of both sides of my mouth a little bit. Like, there is one of the challenges with AI is that it is incredibly easy to generate spam, right? And so from an applicant screening perspective, if someone can create a cover letter like that has all of the right key, like they could upload the job posting and say, write a cover letter for this. And they would submit an application that would probably make it through our automated screening because it would use all the right keywords. So it's a real challenge. And I feel bad for people who are playing by the rules and like getting screened out unfairly. I think stuff like reaching out to recruiters directly on LinkedIn, I think it is the obligation of the company if you reject someone to tell them why. That's something I've always practiced, particularly if someone makes it to an interview stage, is like, I will not just close the door and actually tell you, but I'll like have a conversation and tell you why you were not a fit for the role. So I think it's a real challenge. Like, I think that the rise of AI has just made it so easy to spam this stuff, but how do you still treat people fairly? And for the folks who may be getting discriminated against by an algorithm, essentially, like, that is a difficult situation that requires a lot of thinking.
Yeah, and it's really hard to blame a company for doing that, right? And I guess as you're sort of talking and I'm thinking through this in my head, I just, part of it is that, we live in the world we live in, right? So if you're finding that that's happening, you need to go figure out how you, as the job hunter, need to go figure out how to get past that. And that may mean learning ChatGPT or Gemini and putting your resume in there and asking it to give you back the right answer so you can do that. 20, 30 years ago, I was applying for jobs. I couldn't get anybody to respond to me, and I hired somebody to rework my resume. And it didn't seem that much different, but it made all the difference in the world. And so it's
Yeah.
really not much different than that, right?
I think that's a similar model. Like, I think that it's just really difficult. Like, keyword-based job screening has a role, but it can't be the whole thing. Like, there needs to
Right.
still be a whole person consideration.
Yeah. It is. It's really it's really tough. And I mean, you look at it from an employer's standpoint, right? You can get hundreds of job applications for a single position, and places like LinkedIn and Indeed make it possible to apply for 200 jobs in a day.
Yeah.
And so it creates it's really a tough problem, and I think in many respects the employers are just responding on that. So.
Exactly. I agree.
So what else should I be asking about? So what else should we be talking about?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think what would be interesting. I mean, we covered a lot of the things that I think ProCare does very well. There's the scheduling, there's the connect piece. I mean, honestly, I'll give you one more thing that I've thought a lot about. Like, so, it's come across, hopefully I've used the words equations a couple times. Like, I think of businesses as equations. And I think that something that is interesting about senior living is a lot of the time and energy of vendors in this industry is going towards the revenue side of the equation. So all the EHRs are thinking about capturing care revenue, getting alternative payers for care. You have a lot of technology behind CRMs, behind lead scoring. You and I were just chatting on LinkedIn about a place for mom. Like, everyone is looking at the revenue side of the equation. The challenge is, even if you're able to get more revenue from seniors and senior living, like, frankly, you still have this barbell where you have Medicaid and then you have private pay. And there's like a little bit in between, right? But for most people, the product is either you're not qualified for it, or it's too expensive. And I think that there's a lot of work, and I'm curious where you've seen success here, Steve, that could be done on the cost side of things. You brought up robots, but robots maybe aren't quite the solution. Like, in order to make senior living more accessible for the majority of Americans, it can't get more expensive, right? In fact, it has to get cheaper. But I also have a lot of sympathy for the operators and the owners, where they are running a business and they need to deliver certain results. So, like, you can't just charge people more money. We have to figure out a way to change the cost side of the economics. And that's where I think a lot of the work, so like one of the core value props of ProCare is you get better insurance rates because you're bundled together as part of this co-employment agreement. That's a really good example where you're able to change this equation for an operator who otherwise may say, this is impossible. I just can't keep going on like this. So that's something I think a lot about, is like, it's not just the revenue side, it's the business and the cost side of the equation. And you can't just replace everybody with a robot. Like, we know that's not the solution.
Yeah, and I think it's a really important question. And it's actually something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. So I'll give you just a couple of things that I've thought about that I know will make people cringe. I think in a building that, say, 100 units or less, that is particularly one that's fully occupied at a stabilized level, I don't think they should have a salesperson. I think the executive director should be the salesperson. In places like California, the paperwork and the regulatory stuff is a lot more burdensome than it once was. But my wife ran a 140 unit assisted living community in Southern California many, many years ago. And the idea of even having a salesperson, I mean, it wouldn't even occur to anybody. And that's a big salary that you don't need. And really, the executive director, they know the residents, they know the family, and they know the program. And when she wasn't there, she had an office manager who could do tours and close business. And so I think that we ought to be rethinking how we do dining services. Breakfast in particular, I think is done very poorly. And again, with assisted living, and of course with skilled nursing, you've got requirements to do 3 meals. But I think there are ways we can rethink that. And then the other thing I've talked a little bit about is maybe, particularly as you look at independent living, how many places could you use resident volunteers to do things like the front desk, or maybe even run activities? So I think it's a great point. So
I think all those are great ideas.
So I'm going to give you sort of a couple lightning round questions. The first question is that if you were talking to a young emerging leader in senior living, what piece of advice would you give them?
Go on LinkedIn. There's
Okay.
a lot of smart people who do very good content. Shout out to James Lee, Steve, Anthony Hornsby Hale. I'm thinking of a lot of people in Texas because that's where I live.
Yep.
I think I learned a ton about the business just from going on LinkedIn and finding the right people.
Yep. And one more question for you, and then do you have any book recommendations? And this is for me personally as much as anybody else.
7 Habits of Highly Successful People. It's the best book with the worst title. The title is really corny. The book is really substantial, and it sounds like it's turning you into a consultant. It helps me as a dad, helps me as a husband, helps me as an employee. I really like that book.
Cool. Well, Paul, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation. And why don't you hang on for just a second after we're off the air? And I will be back on Friday with Mark Parkinson on Foresight TV. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation.